This dynamite? Oh, did you see that? Old Pharah could not have done that.
Hi, I'm Tess Lehman, and I was the designer on Pharah's rework for Overwatch 2. So, why did Pharah need a rework? The main issue is that a majority of Overwatch's cast of characters cannot consistently interact with Pharah. Pharah can fly far away from enemies and move omnidirectionally, which makes characters with limited range, high spread, or projectiles struggle significantly in shooting her. Players are forced to pick from an extremely small selection of characters, and a majority of those characters fit a single style of aiming. If players are not good at using hit-scan weapons, then their options are limited even further. Pharah is also in a hard spot for balance because she's a very good character in the lower ranks of competitive play, but a very niche character in the higher ones. So, the goals of Pharah's reworks is to make Pharah more interactable among more of the cast. To achieve this, her distance from enemies needs to be decreased. We don't want her flying forever far away from people, performing very low-risk, low-reward strategies. Removing some of her vertical mobility helps address this issue. Just making her worse wouldn't address her balance concerns, so to compensate for the lack of vertical mobility, I gave Pharah more horizontal mobility. This should make her more dynamic by giving her more control over any situation she's in. It can also help deliver on her core jetpack fantasy, and it's just fun to go fast. The main ability that needed to be changed is her passive hover jets. This ability lets her spend fuel to fly up while holding jump. In order to reduce her time spent flying away from people, hover jets no longer regenerates fuel in the air. This forces her to touch the ground frequently to regain her flight ability. This keeps her flying around, but at a much lower height. To compensate for this, Pharah now moves even faster when using this ability. She gets about twice the speed bonus than she did previously. She also accelerates and decelerates much faster for better aerial maneuverability. I also added the ability to slow Pharah's descent while using hover jets with no fuel. Playtesters worried about their ability to consistently land when running out of fuel, so this slow descent lets players land on high ground and avoid pits. Pharah still falls at 8 meters per second while using this, so she's not able to utilize this functionality to stall in the air. The changes on her hover jets aren't enough to hit her horizontal mobility goals alone, so I added a new ability for Pharah, Jet Dash. This new ability is a horizontal burst of speed that players can utilize in any lateral direction based on their movement inputs. Jet Dash gives Pharah a very versatile movement option that lets players choose how they used it based on their playstyle and their current situation. She can use it to dive the enemies, escape tricky situations, or juke out people she's dueling with. Jet Dash also helps give Pharah more safety and options to help combat the increased risk of her new hover jets functionality. Pharah's ability Jump Jet was another big culprit in helping her stay far away from enemies. Jump Jet boosts Pharah into the sky, providing significant vertical mobility. This ability needed some adjustments with lower height and longer cooldown to help keep the moments of flying high away from enemies less frequent. Pharah still does get to fly into the sky at times, it just goes from happening constantly to more isolated moments of power. Using Jump Jet was, at times, a struggle for playtesters because of the hover jet changes. Players really need some fuel to get mileage out of the ability, so now it refuels Pharah for half her fuel tank. This guarantees players can utilize the move effectively. This extra fuel is implemented to let Pharah go above her normal fuel capacity to 150%. This was added to stop players from needing to optimize their fuel tank, to not break their muscle memory, and to give players more freedom with how they use Jump Jet. The last notable change added was to Concussive Blast. This ability is one of my favorites because it gives Pharah a lot of mobility but forces players to think about their environment surrounding them. The ability is technically supposed to be used for knocking enemy away, but it rarely was. I wanted to make this ability even more versatile, so I added in it dealing damage. This encourages its use on enemies more, so players have to make more interesting decisions about how they spend their cooldown. To make utilizing the ability for different purposes easier, I also lowered the cooldown. She has to decide between finishing blows, mobilities, and distancing enemies from herself and her teammates. So that's the Pharah rework. I increased the counterplay towards dealing with her, while empowering her with even more options than before. Her playstyle has shifted from safely shooting enemies from far away to diving in and risking her own safety for a much better reward. This makes her more fun to play as and easier to play against.